Welcome back to part 3 of the inventory series. In this episode, we will be going over how a player can pick up an item and save it. And in the next episode, we'll be going over how we can drop these items. Without further ado, let's begin. To begin, let's create 3 remote events in replicated storage. Name one harvest, another update data, and the last one setup. Just like I have in here. Let's also create another one called setup. Let's also create a new folder in server storage and name it with the items you want to be able to pick up. So for instance, in here I have wood, stone, and leaves. Afterwards, let's go into our local handler script that we made in the previous video, or the inventory handler, and declare a new variable into the keybinds table we made in the last video called harvest, and define it with enum.keycode and whatever key you want to be able to pick up items with by doing what this means is that I want to be able to pick up an item with the letter F. So for me, I'm doing F. But for you, it can be anything you want. And within your input began event, add an else if to detect when the player presses the key that you use to pick up. So to do so, else if input.keycode is equal to keybinds harvest. Then let's also test it by adding a print. Player has attempted to pick up. Now let's test it. God, I don't have my output out. So then you notice that player has attempted pick up when I press F. You can hear it every time I try to press F. Now let's actually remove this string with mouse.getTarget using the mouse module from the first episode. To begin, let's copy and paste this mouse module from here and add another variable. Local target is equal to mouse.getTarget. Now what this actually does is it gets whatever your mouse is hovering over, it'll get that, and let's replace the print with target and let's test it. So notice how when I press F and my mouse is over terrain, it prints terrain, but when I'm pressing it over wood, it returns wood, and stone and leaves, vice versa. Now next, let's actually go back to the script and replace the print with an if statement, checking whether if your mouse is actually hovering over something by doing target.name. So going back to a module we had over here, we had a module with all of our items, every item we want to be able to pick up inside. And now we're just checking if it's in that module, and if it is, let's pick it up. Then using the remote event we used previously that we made, let's fire the server and add target in the target.name. What this will do is send a message to the script that receives this code to run whatever is inside of the code of a different script. And passing through the target will give the item to the script. Basically, it's really just defining a variable for us just from another script. Make sure you also pass through the target's name with target.name as well. Let's also make sure we can save our inventory. So before starting, make sure your game is published. And go to the game settings tab in home. Go to security and make sure you have enable studio access to API enabled. Don't forget to save. When you're done with that, you can cancel and go back to view. Make sure you have the toolbox open. And next, we'll be searching profile service with no space. Scroll all the way down and make sure you select the one that is made by Loleris, L-O-L-E-R-I-S. Select on that and move this over to replicated storage. I already have it in here, so I'm just gonna delete that. And make sure you have this in here. Next, make another module script that's called Data Manager. I already have my own, so I'll just open this up. And make sure you type all of this code in here. I'm not gonna go in depth on what all this code is, but I'll link a video down in the description if you wanna know how this works. But make sure you have your inventory full of items that you wanna be able to pick up in here. Ignore what this priority for thing is now. I'll go back into what it is later. But for now, let's make a new script in server script service. Delete that really quick. And let's also name it server handler. In this script, let's define a few variables for replicated storage, server storage, and the modules, data manager, and item data. So local rs is equal to game get service replicated storage, and do the following for the other things I just listed. Oh, whoops. Require rs dot data manager, and lastly item data. Require rs dot item data. Next, do you remember the fire server event we triggered in the local script? Let's actually receive that call and run the code in a script by using an on server function. So then rs dot events dot harvest dot on server event connect function, and include the parameters we included here. So then target and target.name. We can rename it to whatever we want. The first parameter here will always be the player. So then player item and item name. To test, let's add a print statement and print out the item. So then print item name. So notice every time I press F, it's actually printing through the server. If it was localized in the local script, it would be green and not, or blue and not green. So then it works. Now make an if statement to check if the item is really the item. What I mean by this is to check if the item from the player's local view is the same as the server's. This pretty much just prevents an exporter from changing item names locally and giving themselves whatever they want. To do this, just make an if statement. If item dot name is equal to item name, then also include a new variable called data using the data manager module that we have created, and insert the player in here. What this does is it'll get the player's data. So like if I have like 5 wood, it'll just like return a table of me having 5 wood. And let's actually use the priority table we made in the data manager. Well, this will be used for is to check what items the player picked up first, and we will make the inventory load up based on this. Let's go more in depth on this. So if you picked up wood first, then leaves, and then left the game, you wouldn't want your inventory showing something like leaves and then wood. Why? Because you picked up wood before the leaves. Before using the priority table, let's actually add an item into the player's inventory by doing data inventory item name plus 1, which will give the player the item it picked up. And now let's use the priority table by checking if the picked up item is first of its kind. Let's put it into a priority table that we made. Now put it into the priority table. Table.insert data priority. And put the item name in there. So what we're just doing here is putting the item the player picked up, if it's the first of its kind, and putting it into the priority table. And now don't forget to actually destroy the item. I'm gonna make a new variable here for debris service. So debris is equal to game get service debris. And now if you don't know what debris is, I have a tutorial for it. I'm not gonna go over what it is right here, but just know it's just for destroying items. So debris, add item, item name, or item, and 0. And lastly, let's actually fire a client event, rs.events update data, fire client, insert the player in the data table. So now what this does is it's the same thing as a fire server event, but instead what's receiving it is a local script rather than the script like a server handler. Now, one last thing you would like to do is to actually detect when the player joins by doing game.players.playerAdded, connect function, and insert player to get the player that joined, and get their data by doing the same thing with data manager. And now let's actually fire another event setup, which we've made in the beginning of the video. Insert the player and insert data once again. So what this will do is, I'm not going to go over it right now, but just know that we're going to be fixing the inventory of the player that joined. So then, like, if you picked up leaves, you would want it to show leaves when you join. So now let's actually make a function to receive this update data fire client event in the inventory handler by doing the following. Go back to the inventory handler and type rs.event dot update data dot on client event, connect function, and pass through data. So what this does is just does the same thing as this on server event, but instead we are calling it in a local handler, which is our inventory handler. So now let's also make a new function called sort inventory. Function sort in, and make sure you pass through the data parameter. And let's actually loop through this data parameter by doing for items amount in pairs data inventory. So we're just looping through our inventory or the player's data. And now let's actually check if an item in the inventory is greater than 0, and if it is, I'll get back to that. If it is greater than 0, then let's create let's check if we have a button for it. So what I mean by button is we are gonna have a GUI. So if you've watched the last video, you'll know that we have a GUI over here. And make sure you have your own button. So I have a item button template that I will use. And in this inventory GUI, I have a templates folder, and in this templates folder, I have the button that I will be using. Make sure the button is a frame and also has children of a text button and a mount. So for instance, every time I pick up like something like wood, I want to make a button for it if it's like the first of its kind. So then call it wood, and then I have like 1, you know? So to do that, let's go back to the inventory and check if we actually have a button for that in the list. Once again, make sure you have your own button and make sure it's in a templates folder and that your button is a frame and it consists of these children. Make sure it's not visible as well. So now let's check if it's actually in the list. To do so, just do if not inventory frame dot list. Find first child items, then if it's not in the list, let's just create a new button for it by cloning it from templates and putting it into the inventory frames list. So item button is equal to inventory GUI dot templates dot item button clone. Change its parameters a bit. Item.name, whoops, item button.name equal to items dot text is equal to items, item button dot mount dot text is equal to x dot mount. And lastly, make it visible. And now make sure you run this in here, in this update data function, pass through data, and now let's test it out. Oh, you notice how it showed all the items. So now you might have noticed that I have gotten all of these items at once. And every time you can hear me pressing F, I'm not getting any of these items. Let's actually fix that by resetting our data. Now, a big factor of this is that we can't like drop items yet or like actually we haven't coded it to update our amount. So going back to our data manager, you might have noticed that we have a delete data function. And what this does is just resets our data because we want to, we want to be able to test out our data storage without it being a hassle. So we have to delete our own data multiple times. So you might have noticed that I have this commented out. Uncomment this and make sure you run it, and then notice how it says that my data has been wiped. Make sure your own user ID is here so you wipe your own data. And now when you're done wiping your own data, let's comment it back out again and let's actually play and test it out. So notice how it shows now, right? Let's go. But something that is major is when I rejoin the game, my items do save. You notice that, but it's not exactly. It doesn't exactly show up. I need to pick something else up for it to show up. So let's actually fix this. By going to the inventory handler and making a new function called inv setup. Pass through data once again. And let's actually make a new variable called priority table. And make it, instantiate it to data priority. So now we are actually using our priority table back in our data. And let's just loop through this priority table by using a for loop. I, me in pairs, priority table, do. And now let's check if something, or whether if there's actually something in this table by doing if priority table 1, then if not has a button by doing inventory frame.list find first child v, then create a new button by just doing the same thing down here. So you can just copy and paste all this code and replace it with what I replaced as well by just doing this. Replace items with v and replace amount with data inventory item name, whoops, not item name, v. And now that should work. Let's test it out. Didn't exactly work. Oh yeah, it didn't run because we actually didn't run this function. So now let's actually create another function that actually receives this call, the setup fire client event. I'm just doing the same thing up here, but instead with update data, we're gonna do setup the on client event connect function data. And now let's do inv setup, pass through data, and now let's test it out. Notice how it worked now. But there's also one last thing. Notice how when I am picking up these items, the amount doesn't update. Yeah, let's fix that. To fix it, let's actually go back to the inventory handler and add a new line. After item button visible is equal to true, an else if statement, checking if the button is actually a button. If there is a button for an item, find first child items, then updates the item button amount by doing inventory frame.list find first child items dot amount dot text is equal to x dot amount. So now then, let's test it out. Wait for everything to load. And it works.